Welcome to the 12th and final episode on my Altar Oracle series of mythological archetypes. For Pisces season, I'm breaking down the motif of the sea god, associated with the zodiac sign Pisces. Well, here we have OCEANOS. OCEANOS, like with many of the entities in this list, is taken almost directly from the Greek example of Oceanos. I like it because it's so obvious to know what he represents. And of course, this kind of Poseidon appearance, this Neptune Poseidon appearance, is probably one of the most popular images here because he is so well known. But there's a few twists on this particular character that I wanted to take from multiple different pantheons and emphasize. Again, there are two male deities in Pisces. The other one is the younger, and he represents the more human-centric kind of fisherman, boatman, pirate, I guess, a patron of sailors and such. He's not as much of a chaotic sea god. Here, Oceanos is like Olokun of Yoruba, representing sea life and nature. And he's very protective, like Tangaroa of Polynesian, of that nature. Tangaroa has many stories where he's fighting against humanity or against other gods that are seeking to abuse the sea. And that's quite noble and I think very interesting and cool motif to put into this mythology going forward in our contemporary world, where reefs are dying and there's the great ocean garbage patch, and the ocean and the seas are taking such a hit these days. I think it's important to have a motif like this that's very protective of that. Nun, or Nu, is the Egyptian primordial sea god, that idea of chaos I keep relating to. We talked about with Nexus, is her counterpart, is this chaos. And chaos is either chthonic, underground, watching over the waters like Abzu of Sumerian Babylonian myth, or he is of the oceans and the chaotic abyss. And the ocean, again, often represents space and the void, metaphorically, when we're talking about mythology and archetypes. You know, we have starships, right? Nun is, like Chaos, one of the very first deities in existence. And his very name kind of represents nothingness, but also newness. Thaumas, I wanted to represent, is a somewhat obscure Greek deity as well. There's many sea gods in Greek that are largely very similar, but probably stem from slightly different linguistic sources. Some of them may be from Phoenician, some of them may be other cultures within the Aegean or outside of it. He relates linguistically to Thalassa, who is a sea goddess of Greeks, and Talas, who is an Albanian sea god. It's all very similar to Tehom, which is a concept in Judaic or Hebrew myth. Tehom represents the dark abyss, essentially. Kind of similar to Leviathan, a goddess in our pantheon here that I haven't shown. Leviatha, I went with. Similar to Tiamat and such from Babylonian myth. It is essentially said in the old biblical accounts that Hebrew God defeated the Leviathan and the abyss in order to become creator of the world. And that's very similar to the myth I talked about with Marduk. In order to prove their worth as king, they had to slay a dragon, and that's an old motif. In this case, it was the sea mother, unfortunately, that they usurped, Tiamat, Tehom, and Leviathan, indicating that that sea mother might be an even older entity that goes back even further for certain marine cultures that might have worshipped them, like Sedna, that's still worshipped by Inuit today. Thotsakan is similar to this kind of Thaumas oceanic deity, this time of the Thai. Ao Kuang is a draconic ocean god, not only of the sea, but also of storms. And this is another thing that gets coupled a lot. A lot of times the sea gods are also storm gods. Poseidon is often also associated with sea storms. In many ways, Zeus and Poseidon were vying for control over the Greek pantheon. And Poseidon was constantly finding ways to subtly rebel from Zeus and do his own thing, much like Pluto did. In truth, Zeus was not king of the gods in any real sense. The gods could be and do and rule wherever they did and however they liked. Ryujin, like Raiju, is a kind of chaotic god, him more of the sea. And whenever we mention a dragon, we need to acknowledge that a dragon is a force of chaos. Yam is another chaotic sea deity of the Phoenicians. And he fits into their story as essentially a version of Typhon that I mentioned before. Again, this great dragon of disaster and destruction. Yam to the Phoenicians, though, is treated a lot more personal, like a Poseidon type figure. He isn't purely a dragon or purely a force of chaos like Typhon is often portrayed. Kiase in the Hurrian myth, I think I mentioned in my Hittite video, is very linguistically related to chaos, the chaos being the Greek god of the primordial abyss, who in the story unleashes a sort of Leviathan upon his enemies, the heroes of the Hurrian pantheon, Teshub and Sauska. The sea monster he releases is Hidamu or Apsi. This myth very much resembles the story of Perseus, where Perseus essentially represents Teshub, the thunder god in that story, and then Andromeda represents Sauska, the beautiful maiden. In the Hurrian tale, Sauska actually seduces the dragon rather than being a completely helpless damsel in distress with Andromeda in the Greek tale. Sauska being more of a war goddess as well as a goddess of beauty. Not simply being like Aphrodite, but having aspects of Athena as well, which originally goes back to that Ishtar source. Kiase is kind of like Poseidon is the keeper of the Kraken, or Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean series. He isn't directly oppressing people, but he is sending and unleashing his monster, his Leviathan, upon people. Njord is this old Norse king of the gods from the Vanir, who might have been a group of Neolithic people living in Denmark and Sweden before the Aesir, who possibly were of Indo-European background, came in. Now, that's very speculative on my part there, but I have my hunches and my theories about a lot of the Vanir deities tended to be very Neolithic and agricultural, and they resembled deities from the Middle East, whereas a lot of the Aesir deities kind of had these Indo-European roots like Thor, possibly even some root to the same thing as the Egyptians with Nu or Nun, this Njord sort of idea. Lear of Welsh, or Lear in Irish, is another sea god who's a kind of grandfather of the Irish. And then a really interesting anecdote here, which I really enjoy, is Proteus, a quite obscure Greek god, is a sea god that represents the transformative power of life, essentially evolution and DNA, interestingly fitting for Pisces as a deity that is transformative and changeable as a mutable sign and a water sign. Proteus represents essentially the first animal. And through transforming into many forms, he created all of the animals on the earth, starting in the seas, which is an interestingly accurate, prescient sort of prediction about where life came from on Earth. It was in the deep sea, at the core of what Oceanos represents. The Kickstarter was fully funded back in December, and the decks should be finished printing in early March. If you haven't pre-ordered one yet, you may do so now on our website, studiopandemonia.com. There's a link in the description as always. I have to ask to like, subscribe, and hit that bell thingy thing. Thank you. It all comes down to one word. Speak of world spinning lies, oh you try.